There he is. Very excited to have him back on the podcast. One of my all-time favorite conversations and people to read and talk to and watch in conversation with other people. Dr. Eddie Glaude Jr., welcome back to Stand Up. Congratulations on your new book. Thanks for joining me.
Man, it's a pleasure, Peter, just to have a chance to dialogue with you and then to lay eyes on you, man. I appreciate it.
I appreciate that a lot. How do you explain how perfect your Windsor knot is on your neckties? We see you on MSNBC all the time. We see those ties. Where did you learn the art of that knot, and do you realize how perfect it is?
It is Morehouse College that educated me in this practice, and it's my obsessive compulsive behavior with perfect knots.
So the first time we spoke, you mentioned, or maybe I did, ask about Morehouse, and I guess I didn't realize, very ignorant to historically Black colleges and universities in America and their traditions and so on. But then I read Bakari Seller's book, and he talks a lot about how going to Morehouse changed him. And I just wanted to ask you about that since you brought it up. How did that college, that experience, change you as a man?
Oh my goodness, it is difficult to put in words. I was a country boy from Mississippi with a lot of confidence, but with no polish, just raw coal, and going to Morehouse and being put in that pressure, right? And it was just amazing. And what's the most important about that experience, Pete, is I met my closest friends, people who I still hang out with. I met when I was 16 years old, and they are. So Morehouse created the conditions for me to meet people who are cornerstones in my life, and then gave me a sense of
You're getting a call.
Yeah, gave me a sense of how important being committed to a just world, a racially just world, actually is. So it was a beautiful experience, man. Sorry about the phone.
No worries at all. You're in high demand because you have a brand new book out, which is excellent, which is getting amazing reviews, and which I'm very excited to talk with you about. And there's so much. It's really hard to figure out where to begin with Begin Again, James Baldwin's America and its urgent lessons for our own. But I got to ask you where you did begin on this project, why you wanted to search through James Baldwin's life and as closely as you could follow in his literal footsteps, go to the places that he went to and lived in and spoke at. Why?
I've been thinking about and teaching about James Baldwin for over 30 years, reading him closely. It took a minute for me to decide to read him closely.
Yeah, you were late to Baldwin.
Yeah, I didn't come to him till graduate school, and I was afraid to come to him because I knew what he would do. Right, I knew he would mess me up.
Yeah,
he would throw me back onto myself, and I would have to deal with the vulnerable little boy that I am, and deal with my daddy issues and all of this. I knew that would happen, so I had to kind of keep him at arm's length for a minute because I didn't have the resources to do that kind of work. But there's something about the way in which Baldwin came to terms with the country's betrayal after the assassination of Dr. King. And as he saw all of those idealistic young people express their rage and disappointment and disillusionment with Black power in the context of Black power, Baldwin had to figure out how to pick up the pieces. And I was like, let me turn to Baldwin in this period of his life, because I think I'm in a similar moment now where despair and disillusionment threaten to overwhelm. How did he handle it? What resources did he draw on that could be useful for me in this time? And that was the foundation for the book.
Yeah, very personal journey and really vulnerable of you to write it the way that you wrote it. I think you've always been, it would seem, honest and vulnerable, but you seem to become more vulnerable the older you get and the more work you put out. Talk a little bit about, because you said, for me in this moment, of course, you are not alone. There are so many other people that are experiencing this growth and these emotions and confronting all of these issues of history and our present time along with you. But you tell your journey in here. Talk a little bit about what that specifically is for you.
There's the excitement around 2008 and the election of the first Black president,
Mhm.
right? And I had been working with Tavis Smiley before then, and Cornel West with the Covenant with Black America, where we were going around the country holding town hall meetings, trying to get Black folk to address these specific issues concerning our communities. And then the phenomenon of Obama hit us, and everyone got excited. Organizers began to focus their energies on Obama, and then he got into office, and I was so disappointed in so many ways, because the Great Recession devastated Black communities, and Obama was kind of having to protect his left flank, his right flank, so he was cautious. And then all of these police murders and of Black folk with Mike Brown, Aiyana Jones. I mean, we get Eric Garner, da da da. And then we saw voter ID laws and voter suppression, and we were seeing the vitriol of the Tea Party, this backlash, which I hate that word, but this detritus of American society beginning to evidence itself. And then the country vomited up Donald Trump.
Yeah.
And
As a result, a lot of scholars say that it was that word backlash. It was a reaction to Obama.
Yeah.
That doesn't, I mean, there's no way, you don't see any way around that. That's kind of the conventional wisdom, and you're not a conventional wisdom guy, but you don't see any way around Trump being a reaction to Obama.
Not at all. The Tea Party was not motivated by economic anxiety.
The Tea Party was a reaction to Obama.
Exactly. And we saw the AstroTurf protests around Obamacare and the like. We knew what was going on. We were screaming it from the top of our lungs as we were trying to push Obama to the left and not have a Black version of Clinton centrist democratic governance, as it were. So when the country elected Donald Trump and everything became about him, it's like we're trapped in this, chamber where he wants to occupy our passions at all times. And so, and because I'm a pundit, even though I'm a professor, I'm in this chamber every single day of every minute of the day, it seems. And it's just driving me, freaking mad. I was going to say another F word, but it's driving, it was driving me mad. Right. And then I was seeing all of these MAGA hats and all of this, and I was trying to make sense of it. And just despairing and disillusioned because of my own political choices at the time and a range of other things. And so I just left the chaos of Donald Trump and ran into the storm of Jimmy Baldwin's life.
I think about the Tea Party. I think their rallying cry was, and they really became popular and influential, I think, in around 2010. Their rallying cry was "Take Back America." That's what we heard so often. Of course, Trump is "Make America Great Again," but they both seem to make this sound like the same thing to me. What does it sound like to you?
It's a nostalgic desire for America where Black folk knew their place, where women were in the home, where Latino folks cut lawn.
Religion?
Yes, exactly. It's Christian, particularly white evangelical Christian. It's a longing for an idealized version of the 1950s. That's what it is. They want a white America in the vein of old Europe or old America.
And they're also longing for a version of America that never existed, even probably for white people. Forget about minorities for a second. I mean, it wasn't there even necessarily for white people, or, the policies that they think were in place never were in place. I mean, the tax rate, for example.
Yeah, I think it's a caricature of the worst elements of Reaganism. You see, and I think that's really important, because what people try to do is draw the line from Donald Trump to Pat Buchanan to George Wallace to Strom Thurmond. And in fact, Ronald Reagan is the soil that produced Donald Trump. Ronald Reagan was the B-list Hollywood actor. He was the America's fantasy. And Donald Trump is the latest B version of that version.
How dare you, sir? come on, come on this show, like this show is and criticize one of the greatest American presidents, Ronald Reagan. It's interesting as we start to reckon with our history and Confederate monuments and so on, who we will kind of allow and not defend, you know. And obviously it seems like everybody is you know, progressive minded, obviously, on board with taking down Confederate monuments and names and so on. Not nearly enough people, I shouldn't say everybody, but a lot of people. Joe Biden, he says, yeah, take down the Confederate monuments, but you got to leave Columbus and Washington alone, apparently yesterday. But nobody seemingly talks about Ronald Reagan. We're not ready, as James Baldwin always made us uncomfortable with things we weren't ready to hear or feel or think or believe. But we're not ready for the criticism that you just laid out on the great Ronald Reagan. How dare you?
We have to be, because right now we're in a moment where the era of Reagan is collapsing. I think the general consensus, well, let me say it differently. I think one of the underlying features of the current protest is that our current way of being in this country is broken, that an economic and political and social set of arrangements have actually, that they're bankrupt. And what I think it has something to do with, right, the increasing wealth divide, the precarity of everyday ordinary workers, right, this aggressive form of policing that's rooted in the framework of law and order and being tough on crime. These are elements of Reaganism. Whether you call it Reaganism, whether you call it Thatcherism, whether you call it neoliberalism, we know over the last 40 to 50 years, we have, as Anand Giridharadas says, we have been playing in an arena that was built by Ronald Reagan, which involved a small notion of a particular understanding of government, where big government is bad. Government's sole responsibility is to ensure the efficiency of the economy and the national defense. It transforms us from being citizens to individual entrepreneurs in pursuit of our own self-interest and competition and rivalry with others. It insists on lower tax rates for the producers, for the shareholders, as it flatlines the wages of everyday ordinary working people, keeping their noses barely above water so they can't organize. It exploits white resentments, hatreds, and fears in the name of crime and the like. So it leads to shall we say, the militarization of police, the expansion of the criminal code, the expansion of carceral state. All of these are features of Reaganism, right? And it's collapsing right in front of our faces. And we need to understand that for what it is.
Yeah, I think that is such an important point that does not get nearly as much discussion. I hope it gets more discussion, because when people look back, and I'm 44, so he's the first president I remember. And I think especially when white people look back at Reagan, they're like, yeah, he's pretty good. You know, look at his approval rate. Look at the wide margins by which he won the presidency, and they look back and all of the high points. But when black people look back at Reagan, or not necessarily Reagan, but if they're not politically astute, but that time in America, they don't see any of the things that white people tout of Reaganism. What do black people see when they look back at his 8 years and what he created? You already touched on some of it generally, but
yeah, but Peter, when Reagan was elected, Doc, they thought Reagan was, in the eyes of black activists, Reagan was as bad as George Wallace. Think about him as governor of California. The whole issue with the Black Panthers, the whole issue with Angela Davis, he was the governor. Think about the tax revolt that happened, that in some ways turned the country's back on the Great Society. That's Reagan. Reagan is handed the baton by Barry Goldwater. He's the one who brings it to the tape, right? So when Reagan was elected, you know, there was a deep sense of hopelessness in Black America. There's a deep fear in Black America, right? In some ways, remember, people forget that George H.W. Bush ran against Ronald Reagan and described his economic philosophy as voodoo economics.
Never forget that. Never. So important.
Exactly.
Because then when he lost the primary, he changed his tune on
exactly
the most important economic theory of that time.
He saw the win. He felt the win, you know. But I think it's important that Jimmy Baldwin saw this on the horizon. He saw Reagan on the horizon. He saw what white America doubling down on its ugliness. And I have a chapter in the book entitled Reckoning, and a chapter entitled The Ruins. And there's a documentary he co-produces entitled I Heard It Through the Grapevine, that's really about the betrayal of the civil rights movement as a kind of way of framing Reagan's election in 1980.
What do you do you think it is, what's more pernicious, effective, or damaging? The kind of dog whistle racism, or the more overt racism? You know, the welfare queen type of commentary, or the more overt racism that obviously came before that in the history of this country?
Well, you know, on one level, it's important that we created a context where you had to dog whistle,
Good point. Sure, I
right?
guess.
Because, and the reason why I say that, because people died, right? If I didn't step off the sidewalk, or my colleague Albert Rabbitoe, his father dared to go to a convenience store and confront the convenience store owner for disrespecting his wife, and the convenience store owner blew his dad's brains out, right? So the reality is that, you know, the previous racial regime was policed by, you know, overt violence, right? And, you know, denying Black people dignity and standing in an overt way. So to shift the post-civil rights consensus is that you had to appeal to racism and to white resentment and hatred by way of the dog whistle. You couldn't do it explicitly. And so the Republican Party, you know, really mastered it. The DLC and Clinton copied it. See, because we can't forget that Clinton, you know, remember he had that press conference about the crime bill in Stone Mountain with Black inmates behind him.
Yeah, yeah. Clinton's policies on crime, as well as his economic policies that he compromised with Republicans on, destroying welfare as we know it, are two things that we should never forget about Bill Clinton.
So the story is not just a Republican story.
No doubt about it. But I don't know if I let you finish there in terms of
sure.
which is worse. And maybe I shouldn't make it a binary. Maybe that's stupid. But I just feel I've heard a lot of Black folks, specifically, I remember this one comedian, Bruce, telling me about how he prefers your overt racism. Just be honest. That's fine with me. I won't be upset with you. Don't hide it so I have to guess as to where you stand.
Right.
Does that make any sense?
No, absolutely. So I see the gist of the question, you know, and look, the loud racist is easy. You know, this is Malcolm X's language. You know, there's the wolf and the fox, right? You know what the wolf is up to. The fox is a different thing, right? So you know, the loud racists are easy. The people who are running around with Confederate flags, screaming the N-word, doing all the things that they do.
Who don't think they're racist.
Right. But in a melodramatic context, if we were watching All My Children, that soap opera, which my mother loved, then that's the way in which the melodrama plays itself out. We can see the enemies. The evil people are, you know, are easy to identify. There's Erica, right? So, but the real problem for us in this country isn't the loud racists. The real problem is the ones who are silent and complicit with those loud racists. The ones who are content to have segregated neighborhoods because they know that their property values will be okay. The ones who are content with unequal education because they just want their kids to go to the best schools. The ones who are content with a healthcare system that is so profoundly problematic because they have, you know, limousine healthcare, right? So it's the ones who are complicit with their way of life and silent about the injustices that define our way of life that, to me, are deeply, deeply troublesome, problematic even.
Begin Again is the name of the new book. And when you began to write it, obviously Trump, when did you start it?
2 years ago.
So Trump is president. It's a dark, dark time for so many of us, especially, you know, minorities, women. But maybe there wasn't a lot of hope then. Who knows? It's different based on who you talk to. Now, though, the book comes out at a time where public opinion is rapidly changing on racial injustice. We can talk about why, but how do you see this time that we're in, and the importance of this book coming out right now with, I don't know if I want to phrase it, the resurgence of the Black Lives Matter movement, but certainly the effectiveness of the Black Lives Matter movement to really change public opinion drastically and quickly?
Well, we're at a moment, we're at an inflection point, to use Mattis's phrase, right? We're in a moment, or to think about it in the blues sense, we're at the crossroads like Robert Johnson was, right? So we have to confront, we have to make a choice, right? What kind of country will we be? And it's important, I think, for me at this moment to be talking about my journey with Baldwin because of the weight, the moral weight of the choice in front of us. In the past, we've had a chance to be otherwise. You think about radical reconstruction. We had a really genuine attempt at a multiracial democracy.
Post-Civil War.
Yeah, Stevens and all these folk were trying to go back and do their first works over. That's when the first modern US nation state emerges. Our notion of citizenship really takes shape in that period with the passage of the 13th, 14th, 15th Amendment. What did we get in response?
Jim Crow.
We got Jim Crow. We got convict leasing. We got the monuments, right? To the Confederacy. We got the lost cause. And then, so in a moment in which we could be otherwise, we doubled down on the ugliness. We'd made a bad choice. The mid-20th century, Black freedom struggle, King, Black power, however we want to describe that struggle. What did we get in response? Calls for law and order, laid the foundation for the carceral state, the tax revolt. Assassinations, the tax revolt, which shredded the social safety net, which turned its back on the basic contract of the New Deal. And what did we get in response? We elected Ronald Reagan. So 2 moments, even with the election of, as we laid out with the election of Barack Obama, we get Tea Party, voter ID laws, voter suppression, Donald Trump. So it's a moment in which the country has an opportunity to choose to be otherwise. But our history tells us that we aren't very good at this.
Well, we're not very good at this because it's super uncomfortable. And uncomfortable things are difficult for people, especially people who are comfortable.
Exactly.
And Baldwin makes us very uncomfortable, made you uncomfortable to kind of confront and to read him, which is why, it wasn't until grad school. Most Americans probably still don't know who James Baldwin is, unfortunately. Most white Americans, for sure, I would imagine. But what is it about Baldwin that makes us all so uncomfortable?
Tells the truth, unvarnished, straight, no chaser, right? He's it's like Emerson thinking about America, right? You get this beautiful prose. Baldwin is thinking about America, but on the other side of the tracks, right? It's not gonna be a soaring rhetoric. He's gonna take you to the trash heaps that kids play in. He's gonna take you to piss-stained halls in Harlem, right? So there's this, he's gonna force you to see the bodies dangling from poplar trees, the contradictions that are at the heart of the country. He's gonna say, you've been lying to yourself. And you've been lying to yourself because you want to be comfortable. You are invested in the illusion of safety, and that illusion is going to strangle you, right? And so he has this wonderful line. He says, I want us to do something unprecedented. I want us to create a self without the need for an enemy. You just kind of go, damn, that's serious. But in order to do that, you got to tell the truth about yourself. Right? You got to tell the truth about the country. And so Baldwin has this twinning move, Peter. He demands that you engage in the examined life. He believes with Socrates that the unexamined life isn't worth living. So you got to deal with the mess in you.
Yeah.
Because Baldwin believes that it's the messiness of our interior lives that actually evidences itself in the messiness of our social arrangements. To use the language, we're fucked up. And so we create fucked up things. And so we have to deal with this first. So he says, I'm not the N-word. I never have been. The question is, why did you need the N-word in the first place? And until we figure that out, why you need it, I'm going to give it back to you. I'm not the N-word, baby. You are. Now deal with that, right? So this is what he's dealing with. Yeah.
But you keep saying we. But I feel like Black people know the truth. They live the truth. You don't have to be a scholar as a Black person. You have to have any education. You just have to be a Black skin and live in America during that time, during now, to kind of understand the truths that I think a lot of white people are starting, sadly, lately, to figure out. And a lot of that has to do with cameras and just a sense of honesty. But it's not Black people who had to confront the truth, is it? It's
No.
everybody else.
When I use my we, it's a moral declaration. It's an ethical stance that I'm not giving up on this effort, right? That the we that I'm invoking, right, is a sense of our collective um, um, relation to each other, right? So that's not quite the right way to put it, but our sense of relationship to each other. It's aspirational in one hand, and it's also, Peter, an announcement of my investment in this. So I could easily say, white folk have just lost their damn minds, right? That I could easily say, and I do at times say this, but when I invoke a we, I'm telling you that I'm invested in this, that I'm here, that I'm a part of it all.
I wonder if that's to some extent inaccurate. A lot of white people have obviously lost their minds in terms of, I tweeted this last night, but Republicans are now nominating, potentially electing, these QAnon conspiracy theorists who think, Democrats are lizard people and demons. Literally, like I'm not joking. Like they believe they're protecting pedophile rings and so on. So by that measure, I would say, yeah, a lot of white people have lost their minds to so many of these conspiracy theories and become part of a cult. But may I defend white people, if I dare say, and say we never had our minds. I remember I grew up a certain way. I was educated a certain way. I had this specific experience. It was sheltered. It was mainly homogenous. Thankfully, my mom worked as a public school teacher in the city of Syracuse, and we had exposure to other cultures a little bit in our family. But my point is, it wasn't until I read Howard Zinn that I came to the people's history that I was like, oh my gosh, we are fucked up, and started to learn these truths that were so uncomfortable to learn about the history of America and the group that technically I belonged to because of the color of my skin. My point is, I feel like so many white people, especially, just never learned it because we were never taught it, and it was easy because we're so segregated.
Yeah, and then there's willful ignorance, because you knew the side of the tracks, you knew the side of the town, you knew what was happening over in a certain sector of Syracuse. You knew. I mean, so Jimmy says this in The Fire Next Time, right? There's a kind of innocence about what is happening to folk in the country, and the innocence is the crime, right? But I want to say this to you. I want to make a distinction that Jimmy makes in The Evidence of Things Not Seen, his last book about the Atlanta child murders. He makes a distinction between white people and people who happen to be white. White people is a political and ethical, moral position where there is an investment in one's identity as white, and then there are people who happen to be white. And that what I mean by that are those folks who are engaged in the ongoing work of interrogating, right, how whiteness works in their lives, how racism, right, comes to them as easy as language, right? This is what Wendell Berry, the Kentucky-born writer, wrote in his wonderful little book, The Hidden Wound, right? So there's this sense in which there's this ongoing work of understanding how race overdetermines the distribution of advantage and disadvantage. So when I say white people, I'm talking at a certain level of generality about people who are invested in a particular kind of identity. Because I happen to love a lot of people who happen to be white, and then they're white people, right?
Well said. Yeah, no, that's the nuance that I love about talking to you and reading you, and the nuance that I miss when you're on TV, because every time you're done talking, I'm like, no, let him talk more. Shut up. More Eddie. One of the personal experiences that I had in college, and then one of the, I think, things I learned from watching If Beale Street Could Talk, directed by Barry Jenkins. Of course, the book, it's a movie based on a book by James Baldwin. I learned Black love. And what I mean by that is I had never witnessed Black love intimately. I hadn't seen it. In college, I witnessed it because I became very close with a lot of black guys. And I remember sitting one night outside the library where my friend was crying because he was worried about his mom who was ill. And he talked about how close he was with his mom. And that was a really important moment for me. And watching If Beale Street Could Talk showed me a different kind of black love, romantic black love. And I wonder if being exposed to that changed my views that I had somehow maybe ignorantly and without an understanding formulated. And that to me is kind of like what Black Lives Matter is. It's like what so much of your work is showing all of us that we aren't different, but white people believe that we are so often. We don't value black lives. And I think it's partially because we don't understand black love is the exact same as our love, whether it be familiar or romantic. Did I say anything that made sense that you could jump out of in terms of Baldwin's work?
Sure. I think at the heart of the American project is this contradiction that was wrapped around the legs of the table upon which the Declaration of Independence was signed. And it is this belief that white people matter more than others, that they are valued more than others, that the color of one's skin determines one's capacity and character. And they had to say this. Baldwin has this wonderful line. I write this in the book. He has this wonderful line where he talks about the lie. It's a fascinating moment, and it's at the heart of something that I was trying to work through in the book. He says, the people who settled the country had a fatal flaw. They could recognize a man when they saw one. They knew he wasn't anything else but a man. But since they were Christian, and since they had already decided that they came here to establish a free country, the only way to justify the role this chattel was playing in one's life was to say that he was not a man. For if he wasn't, then no crime had been committed. Right? That lie is the basis of our present trouble. So there's a moment of dehumanization, of justifying using black bodies as a source of capital accumulation. And the discourse around that, think about it, Peter. Black women's wombs were sites of profit, right? And so
that
what
just got me. Whoa, never heard that.
Yeah,
never heard it quite put like that, man.
And so what happens to a country predicated upon a system that exploits the labor of these folk, knowing that they're human beings, because at the cover of night they're going into the slave quarters and engaging in all sorts of heinous acts, right? Knowing that they're human beings, but yet treating them as if they're chattel, right? So that lie is at the heart of it all, you see? That devaluation is at the heart of it all. And every instance in which we try to change the course of things, there's a reassertion that white people are valued more than others. That's at the heart of it all, that lie.
Yeah, and never heard that. That would actually really affected me, the way that you phrased that. And I just watched that film Harriet,
Yeah.
and about Harriet Tubman, and watching the depictions of people's relationships and people's families being torn apart. I think what you just said is also I try to boil things down so I can understand them, but there was hundreds of years, centuries of dehumanization, of work, real work, to convince people that black bodies were not as human as white bodies. Black lives are not as human as what your work has been dedicated to, and of course what James Baldwin's work is dedicated to, was a harsh reality of introduction of humanization, of reversing hundreds of years of beliefs of dehumanization. You are humanizing in what you are combating what we have learned and what we have somehow for some reason accepted in our nation and in our culture of dehumanization. That's what it is. It's what it is every day.
And the thing that the critical point is that you cannot tell me that if you have been engaged in over 400 plus years of dehumanizing someone, that you haven't been dehumanized yourself. That what you're trying to do to me actually distorts and disfigures your soul.
How so?
Because you can't engage in such monstrous acts and not become a monster yourself. What does it mean that you can literally sell your child? You know that that's your child, and you still put them on the auction block. What does it mean that you know that you would not kill a white drunk kid who parked his car outside of a Wendy's? You know you wouldn't shoot him in the back because you never done it. What does it mean? What does it say about you that you would shoot him in the back, right? That you would kill him in cold blood and then kick him when you get to him? That isn't about Rayshard Brooks. That isn't about the child. That's about you. So what Baldwin is saying, the person in the moment you debase, you end up debasing yourself, right? And Santayana would put it, the philosopher put it this way. He says, people who aren't, and I'm paraphrasing, people who aren't aware of their history are doomed to repeat it.
Yeah.
But what he forgot to say is that people who aren't aware of their history, who are blind, not only are they doomed to forget it, but they often become They become monstrous, right? So this is what I'm suggesting here.
Yeah. What is there a way to describe and talk about the importance of James Baldwin's fiction versus his nonfiction?
Yeah, I love Jimmy's fiction, but I'm not a big interpreter of his literary writings, his novels. Let me put it that way. Giovanni's Room was just was amazing. He drops. Think about this, Peter. He writes Go Tell It on the Mountain, Notes of a Native Son, emerges as this extraordinary figure, interpreter of American race relations and the like, that odd phrase, race relations. And then he writes Giovanni's Room, a novel about same-sex love. But it's not about same-sex love, it's about love,
right, between
people, two men, right? And he dares to, and then he says, I had to write it because, I didn't want you to hold that over my head. I told you, you didn't. It's just the beauty and brilliance and bravery and courage of this fragile queer Black man is just amazing. But I tend to gravitate to the nonfiction because I guess that's my sensibility.
Did he become disillusioned?
Oh yeah.
How would you describe that journey? And how would you describe your own journey right now? Are you disillusioned? Answer his first.
Yeah, they killed King. They assassinated him, the apostle of love. He's not naive about human beings, but what does it say about white America that they would kill him? And he collapsed, went to pieces. Tried to commit suicide in '69.
Baldwin.
Yeah. Had to go elsewhere. Wound up in Istanbul for a while to try to figure out how to begin again. He saw the country. He saw the hard hat revolution. He saw, the vitriol of the protest against busing. He saw what Nixon was doing and how he laid the foundation for Reagan and the betrayal of Carter in between. So his we changed, and this is an important point. In the early Baldwin, he says, right, the problem is not us. The Negro problem isn't about Black people, it's about white people. But Black folk have to love in order to help white people come to see themselves differently. But by the end of his life, he gave up on that notion. My task, and this is how I translate it, my task is not to convince the Trump voter to not hold insidious commitments. I'm tired of being preoccupied with the Trump voter. My task instead is to try to build a world where those insidious commitments have no quarter to breathe. So Baldwin is like, white folk got to deal with white folk. They got to save themselves. But we still have to build a new Jerusalem. And then they will have to make a choice. Can we build a world where whiteness affords you no advantage at all? Right? And that's what we should spend our energy, it seems to me.
Can we build that world? Are you disillusioned that we can build that world?
Du Bois, the great scholar and author of The Souls of Black Folk, said in his elegy to about his son, he has a hope that's unhopeful, but not hopeless. A hope not hopeless, but unhopeful. That's the way he put it. A hope not hopeless, but unhopeful. It's a blues-soaked hope. So I have a hope that we can build a new world, a new Jerusalem. But, you know, as B.B. King would say, nobody loves me but my mother, and she could be jiving too.
I love that you answer me with quotes. I want to be that guy someday, but I don't think anyone would believe it. Like when you do it, I'm like, yeah, of course. He's an academic. He's a scholar. He's a writer.
Peter,
If I did it, people would be like, what are you doing? Pete, what are you doing? Why are you answering with quotes? It's not even. And then I think they'd probably be like, it's not even the quote, jackass. I got it wrong. But what do you think of, you know, I feel like I've asked this question to every single Black person I talk to on the record, much less off the record. What is this moment that we're in? How do you describe it? Do you think your son's generation, my daughter's generation is different? Because the only thing, I see two things that give me a lot of hope. My 75-year-old father burning down racist friends over emails, just literally, I'm done. I'm done. And his own transformation on the issue. And I see younger people out in the streets seeming to understand our history and the inequities of it. And I'm talking about white people. And obviously an understanding and embracement of diversity overall. And then finally, the polling. There, you know, and I don't know if you gave a shit about the polling, but public opinion polling on the idea of and the movement of Black Lives Matter and the change that we see today versus 3 years ago, it gives me I don't want to say a lot of hope because I'm tenuous, especially after reading, you know, getting into your book and getting into Baldwin's work. And you mentioned earlier Reconstruction, and you mentioned, you know, the 50s and 60s. This is kind of the third iteration. It's another movement, another outrage. And where will it go? How do you feel about this time?
So around the poll data, there's a conundrum, a paradox in sociological literature, right? Since the 1960s, we've actually seen a decline in racist views. So, you know, in the middle of the 1960s, people were vehemently against interracial marriage, supported segregated schools, and we've seen a precipitous decline in those racist views. But there's not a relationship. There's a gap between the decline in racist opinion and the support of policies to remedy racial injustice. So you could be against racism and racial discrimination. You can say it, but you're against affirmative action as a remedy. You're against. So as we're seeing, poll data showing white America's embrace of Black Lives Matter, the critique of policing, we have to see what that data shows us about their support of policies to transform the nature of policing in the country, because the gap always exists. So that's the first thing I would say. The second thing I would say about the generation is that there's something different, because I think this generation, whether they're millennials or Gen Zers or Zoomers or however we want to describe it, is that they know the place is broken. They've come of age in moments of catastrophe, whether it's Hurricane Katrina, whether it's the Great Recession, whether it's mass school shootings, murders by police of people in the street, Black Lives Matter, a global pandemic, economic devastation, credit card debt being surpassed by student loan debt. I mean, we can just go on and on and on. And, you know, having to move back home, all this stuff is happening. So they've grown up in an age where I think they've drawn the conclusion that the whole thing is broken. But the Boogaloo Boys are not baby boomers.
These are white supremacist Boogaloo Boys,
Richard Spencer is not a baby boomer. Right. Dylan Roof is not a baby boomer. So at the very moment there's a judgment being made that something is broken, people are banking they're banking for progressive policies, and some are becoming autocratic and fascist, right? And reaching for authoritarian languages as they scapegoat. So there's no guarantee that this moment will generate the outcome. But I say this, wherever human beings are, we got a chance. We just got to step up and struggle.
Begin Again is the new book, and I congratulate you on it, and clearly the tremendous amount of work and hours and travel even that you put into following James Baldwin's life and path, and as well as being vulnerable enough to share yours. And I also just want to say you're simply one of my favorite people to listen to watch, and to read. I think your ability to speak with such passion and consistency and statistics and facts is unlike very many people of our generation. You're a very special person. I hope you realize how important your work is to so many people.
Well, thank you, Pete. Thank you for everything you're doing, man. Appreciate you.
Finally, I do want to ask you, though, I realized I was going to ask you this at the beginning, your school, Princeton University, where you'll be in conversation, by the way, with Cornel West, who I think you call a mentor.
That's
Looking forward to that conversation. Has just changed the name of its public policy school, one of the best in the nation, of course. They've gotten rid of the name Woodrow Wilson. You've been talking about this. You've been tweeting about this. How do you feel about that change?
Well, between Princeton changing the name of its public policy school and the state of Mississippi taking down the flag, I think hell is frozen over.
You're gonna pinch yourself.
Yeah. What's going on? I think it's about time. It's a wonderful gesture. Princeton understands that the country has historically disregarded the effects of white supremacy and racism, and that the way in which Princeton celebrated Woodrow Wilson in some ways duplicated that disregard. And so I think the president of Princeton was very clear that who we take ourselves to be today and who we aspire to be is not in alignment with the values of Woodrow Wilson. Woodrow Wilson will always be a central part of Princeton's history. Princeton would not be Princeton if it wasn't for him. But the values we uphold, right? The values that we embrace, the Princeton that is today isn't Woodrow Wilson's Princeton.
Right.
And that's what history is all about. The questions always change and our answers always change as we ask them, as we try to answer them.
Dr. Glaude, thank you for being our professor today. It's a great honor to be in conversation with you. Thank you.
Appreciate you, man.